Hi, it's Sunday, April 9th, and with the help of some tech people, I've gotten the video portion of my computer to work again. Or maybe it was always working, I just didn't know how to do it right. Anyway, I just finished grading your week 10 budget assignments, and I apologize that I'm a little slow doing that. But there were a couple of themes or common comments that I made on your paper, so I wanted to just highlight them at the beginning of this video for the week, and we'll talk about other stuff in a moment. But just the overview here is that in your budget narrative and in your budget chart, you want to project to the reader that your budget estimates are really good, solid numbers. You want to make sure that the reader's not thinking, well, how did they come up with that number? And the stuff between my narrative, what's in the narrative and what's on the budget sheet don't really match. I don't know. I think their budget numbers are really pretty shaky. That's exactly what you don't want the reader to think. You want the reader to think, oh, look at this. These numbers, I see how they arrived at them. I think they're good estimates, and what they show me is that this is a very doable project for the price tag that they've placed on it, and there's also looks like some sustainability into the out years. Okay, so if that's what you want to project, there are a couple of things you need to make sure you do in the narrative and in the budget chart itself. Okay. The first thing, and some of you did this and some of you didn't, so I'm not sure if there was a template from which you were working off of, but normally at the beginning of a budget narrative, you have a sentence or two that just gives the big picture. In other words, the total cost of this project is X, and of that amount, we're asking from XYZ Foundation this grant amount. In addition to that, other in-kind costs or support equals this dollar amount, and we're getting additional hard dollars from this source. Okay, so that at the very beginning of your budget narrative, you've reiterated again the big picture. What's the total cost? What's the amount of the grant we're asking for? And where are the other resources coming from? You've probably said that maybe somewhere else in your grant proposal, but having it right here at the beginning of the budget section makes it really easy for the reader to remember, okay, this is the big picture. Okay. The second thing you want to make sure you do in the narrative is to explain how each of the numbers is arrived at that you have on your chart. This is particularly true for big numbers. If you just put down a big fat number there, whether it's actually a large number or large relative to your budget, and you don't say how you've arrived at that number, the reader's going to say, well, how'd you come up with this number? It's probably the most important number in the whole budget, and you haven't told me anything about it. So again, to inspire confidence that you know what you're talking about, you have to detail how each of the numbers in your budget chart have actually been arrived at. Okay, and that's let's see, and that goes to the next part. That anything you talk about in the narrative should have a line on the chart, and any number on the chart should make sure that there's a narrative that discusses that number and how you arrived at it. Okay, and then lastly, you should include on your chart all costs, even those that aren't going to be funded through the grant. Okay, so your chart should look something like this, right? Down one side are the items, and then here across the top are the different budget amounts and where the money is coming from. So if you have an item here, normally personnel, how much of that is going to be funded through the grant, how much of that's coming from other sources in hard cash, how much is in kind if people are volunteering their time, well, you ought to have a budget number there that reflects that. And then over here at the end comes the total. Okay? And then of course at the bottom you have the same thing. The total of all the expenses that are being funded by the grant, which is the amount you're requesting, all the money that's coming from other sources, possibly the agency itself, and then finally in-kind contributions, and then the total of the whole project. Okay? This again is to just clarify for the reader how much the total project cost, how much you're asking for in the grant, and how much money is coming from other places. Because that again gives the reader the big picture. All the costs that are related to this project, are they accounted for? Because I, as the funder, don't want to give you, 25% of the grant and not be really confident that the other 75% of the grant is actually going to be funded and sustainable, right? And then the other reason why you want to show those other sources of income is because funders love to do what they call leverage their dollars. Okay, that just means that they love to say, well, because I put up 25%, 75% came from other places, and so my 25% really caused the whole 100% to be funded. Of course, every grant person is saying that, grant giver is saying that, right? So they're double counting all over the place, but that's not the point. The point is they love to be able to say their money leveraged other money to make this good thing happen. Okay? I think that's all I had to say about the grant assignments. Let's see. The other thing I just wanted to talk about a little bit was our discussion this week about risk planning or risk assessments, and to highlight the last thought that I put in a post yesterday, which is for those of you who know evaluation, and we'll be talking about evaluations this week and the next couple of weeks actually, there's this type of evaluation that's simply called implementation study or implementation evaluation. And that's simply an evaluation that kind of compares the theory and the design of the program that is being evaluated with the actual implementation. And oftentimes there's slippage between the two. And so you can't say that a particular proposed program is ineffective if in fact it wasn't actually implemented as intended. And because there's lots of time slippage there is this whole new or distinct category of evaluations that's simply implementation evaluations. And that really lines up perfectly with our discussion this week about risk assessment and risk planning, because what you're really trying to do there is anticipate the slippage between the theory and the actual practice. And because you've been able to anticipate it, you've been able to either prevent it, or when it comes, there's a quick plan B that you can get to. Okay? Don't mind that phone. Don't mind that phone behind the screen here. Okay? So that's sort of that. And then this week we're going into the last segment of the course, a sort of evaluation. And in many grants they ask you about how are you going to evaluate your project. If you've talked at the beginning about need, and you've talked about a theory of change, and you've talked about the cost, and essentially what you hope your project will do, well then the funder wants to see if you have a way of being able to evaluate whether or not you've actually achieved what you hoped you would achieve. So in turn you can tell the funder that they got what they hoped they were buying when they funded your project. Okay? That's it for now. I'll see you online, and if you have any questions, you can always call, right? 413-237-7475. Okay? All right, thanks.